Imagine, imagine looking up at the sky over your city, a capital that has been relatively insulated from a war raging hundreds of miles away, and suddenly you see this giant black shroud of smoke rising from a local oil refinery.
I mean, it instantly shatters any illusion of normalcy.
It really does.
So,
Welcome to the Clarin Array Show Daily World Brief, available at clarinarrayshow.com. As of June 22nd, 2026, that shattered illusion is the physical reality in Moscow following a weekend of Ukrainian drone strikes.
yeah.
But this visceral, on-the-ground reality stands in stark contrast to the sort of sterile, high-level diplomatic maneuvers happening over in Switzerland.
Right, where mediators from Qatar and Pakistan just announced a 60-day roadmap toward a final peace deal between the United States and Iran.
And the framework outlines these massive structural changes. You've got the creation of a Lebanon deconfliction cell, which is essentially a dedicated military hotline and coordination team meant to stop accidental skirmishes from spiraling into a regional war.
It also includes the lifting of blockades on Iranian ports, a communication line for the Strait of Hormuz, and a sweeping $300 billion reconstruction plan for Iran in exchange for long-term nuclear constraints.
The sheer scale of that $300 billion reconstruction plan, it fundamentally alters the economic gravity of the Middle East.
You really have to view this from the perspective of regime survival. Domestically, the Iranian government is facing an inflation rate that hit 77% last month.
And they are still managing the fractured aftermath of those massive anti-government protests from earlier this year. The regional conflict initially triggered a temporary wave of nationalism, but the underlying civilian exhaustion from economic freefall and state repression is still the dominant force.
Exactly, which is why this diplomatic roadmap offers the regime a financial lifeline disguised as a geopolitical compromise. However, the true test of this framework is not the signing ceremony in Switzerland. It's the immediate execution on the ground, where the mechanics of war are just far less predictable.
Because the physical reality on that ground contradicts the neat optimism of those diplomatic roadmaps. Clashes are actively continuing between Israel and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon as we speak.
And if you turn to the war in Ukraine, the conflict is escalating through what military strategists call asymmetric warfare. That's where one side uses relatively cheap, accessible technology to strike devastating blows against a larger conventional military.
Those drone strikes in Moscow over the weekend are a perfect example of that. Simultaneously, Russian forces are employing these grueling, slow infantry tactics in the Donbas region. They are infiltrating the strategic city of Kostiantynivka, sometimes advancing only 100 meters a day in this brutal effort to surround Ukrainian defenders.
The disconnect between a peace summit in Switzerland and the reality of a 100-meter-a-day siege is just jarring. These contrasting realities demonstrate how modern conflicts are fought on entirely different timelines and entirely different technological planes.
In Moscow, the drone strikes are meticulously designed to bring the psychological weight of the war to a civilian population that has largely been shielded from it, while practically disrupting domestic fuel supplies.
We are already seeing the severe public consequences of that specific strategy. Russian-backed authorities have actually suspended civilian fuel sales in occupied Crimea due to acute shortages.
Meanwhile, that infantry crawl in Kostiantynivka is a brutal, traditional siege right out of the 20th century. Both of these tactics, drone warfare disrupting fuel logistics and slow territorial grinding, they dictate daily survival and they shape global energy markets.
They create a severe disconnect between the geopolitical maneuvering of diplomats and the grim daily realities for civilians from Lebanon all the way to the Donbas.
We are seeing physical borders redrawn by military force, but in places like Albania and Czechia, the borders being fought over are civic ones. It's battles over who owns public space and ultimately who controls the truth.
Right. In Albania, which is an EU candidate country, tens of thousands of citizens are participating in what is being called the Flamingo Revolution.
The catalyst there is a planned $1.5 billion luxury mega resort on Sazan Island and the Zvernik Peninsula. It's backed by American investors Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump.
And that development directly threatens the Piche-Poronardo Reserve. That is a crucial protected habitat for endangered species like monk seals, loggerhead turtles, and of course, migratory flamingos.
Public fury really boiled over after the Albanian government actively amended national conservation laws specifically to accelerate this development. But how does a foreign real estate venture spark a nationwide existential crisis about corruption and inequality in an EU candidate country?
Well, the real estate venture acts as a lightning rod for decades of accumulated civic grievance. For Albanian citizens, the island of Sazan is not just land, it is a historic, protected national monument.
So when a multi-layered shell company arrives with plans to build a 10,000-room resort on environmentally fragile territory, and the government immediately alters long-standing conservation laws to accommodate it, the public perception is that the state apparatus functions exclusively for the global elite.
I mean, the protests have grown far beyond the specific resort at this point. They are now targeting a political establishment blamed for prioritizing predatory capital over basic public services, healthcare, and education.
It has become a flashpoint for the broader, terrifying realization that the country's natural resources are basically being liquidated before Albania can even formally enter the European Union.
And that erosion of trust in state institutions is migrating from environmental protection directly into the realm of public information.
Which brings us to Czechia, where thousands of public broadcasters held a 24-hour strike earlier this week. Prime Minister Andrej Babi's government pushed legislation to scrap the traditional license fee system, shifting broadcasters to a direct state budget allocation.
That effectively rolls funding back to 2008 levels. You're looking at removing roughly $19 million from radio and $48 million from television.
But taking the funding directly from the state budget means politicians hold the purse strings. Broadcasters view this as an existential threat to editorial independence, remembering the era before 1989 when the government directly controlled news content.
The Czech media strike highlights a very deliberate, mechanical strategy to weaken institutional checks and balances. By holding the financial purse strings directly through the state budget, the governing coalition can exert immense pressure on journalists without technically passing censorship laws.
Especially considering that coalition includes far-right factions demanding explicit control over content. This pattern of institutional manipulation is also playing out in Romania, where the crisis centers on constitutional norms rather than broadcasting budgets.
Romanian President Nicu Serdan, who's a former civil society activist who actually campaigned on the rule of law, he bypassed parliament entirely on Sunday to nominate a controversial prime minister, Adrian Bistay.
He took this unprecedented, unconstitutional step in a desperate bid to prevent far-right, pro-Russian parties from seizing power following the collapse of the four-party coalition.
And this falsification of public institutions takes an entirely different, perhaps more insidious form in Germany, where the authenticity of the information ecosystem itself has been compromised.
The Berlin-based newspaper Tagesspiegel recently suspended its former publisher, Stefan Andreas Kastorf, after discovering he secretly used artificial intelligence to write political opinion pieces.
The publication deleted several articles acknowledging a severe breach of editorial guidelines. Political opinion pieces, they are meant to offer analytical classification, ethical weight, and human judgment to guide democratic debate.
The undisclosed use of a machine to generate political commentary is a direct violation of the foundational contract between a news organization and the reader.
Connecting these seemingly disparate events reveals a severe multi-front stress test on public trust across Europe. Whether it is the selling of protected environmental land in Albania, the financial strangulation of independent public broadcasting in Czechia,
or the breaking of constitutional norms in Romania, or the falsification of journalistic authenticity in Germany, the core issue is exactly the same.
institutions designed to protect the public interest, whether environmental, democratic, or informational, are being bypassed or hollowed out from the inside.
When the mechanisms of accountability fail across this many sectors simultaneously, the civic stakes elevate from political disagreements to a matter of daily survival and basic societal cohesion. For more daily briefings, brain candy explainers, and classic audiobooks, visit clarinarratio.com.
Following that discussion of AI disrupting civic journalism, you have to look at the financial mechanics driving this technology. They are reaching scales that basically eclipse the GDP of entire nations.
The upcoming SpaceX initial public offering on the NASDAQ aims to raise $75 billion, pushing the company to a staggering $1.75 trillion valuation.
This IPO carries massive civic and public stakes. It likely elevates Elon Musk's net worth past $1 trillion, cements an 80% voting control structure, making him legally unfireable by a board of directors.
And it aims to fund the launch of AI data centers into orbit. The explicit goal is to bypass Earth's physical energy grids and cooling limits entirely by moving the infrastructure into space.
Wall Street is pricing these technology sectors not just as private companies, but as sovereign-level infrastructure providers.
Mm.
The orbital AI data center concept is a stunning admission that the physical energy demands of artificial intelligence are rapidly becoming unsustainable here on Earth.
However, that $1.75 trillion valuation also reflects a massive leap of blind faith, considering SpaceX reported a nearly $5 billion net loss in 2025.
Furthermore, the dual-class share structure, which shields the CEO from any shareholder accountability, is a severe governance risk. It concentrates planetary-scale technological decisions, including orbital energy consumption and satellite deployment, into the hands of a single, unremovable individual.
The ideological battle over who actually controls this infrastructure is clearly visible in the IPO race between Anthropic and OpenAI. Anthropic is currently favored by financial analysts, projecting $47 billion in revenue due to its deep integration with corporate enterprise clients.
There's a stark ideological split separating these two giants. Anthropic's CEO, Dario Amodei, has positioned his firm cautiously. They are actively refusing to allow their AI to be used for military mass surveillance or autonomous weapons.
In sharp contrast to OpenAI, which has moved to fulfill lucrative Pentagon contracts, leaning heavily into the military-industrial complex to subsidize its massive, unsustainable computing costs.
That ideological split dictates the future of global security and human labor. While Anthropic focuses on embedding its systems into the mundane daily operations of the world's largest corporate enterprises, OpenAI is seeking the massive sovereign capital required to build artificial general intelligence through defense and intelligence contracts.
Despite their different approaches, both models require an extraordinary amount of human labor to be permanently displaced just to justify their trillion-dollar valuations.
The financial markets are essentially placing a multi-trillion-dollar bet on the rapid, systemic obsolescence of human workers across multiple sectors of the economy.
This dynamic perfectly illustrates author Cory Doctorow's concept of the reverse centaur. In automation theory, a centaur is a human empowered by a machine like a chess grandmaster, using a computer to explore moves, expanding their capabilities.
But the reverse centaur is a system where the machine demotes the human to a result-checking drone, solely to serve the business model's demand for cheaper labor.
We see this actively happening within Microsoft right now. Despite posting $217 billion in profits last year, the company's Xbox division is shutting down acclaimed, boundary-pushing art studios like Ninja Theory and Double Fine.
They are firing the human creators who make innovative, unpredictable art to subsidize the hardware and data costs of the AI component boom. The destruction of creative studios to fund massive, energy-hungry server farms is the reverse centaur applied directly to human culture.
The machine is no longer aiding the artist. The artist is being liquidated to feed the machine. But the impact of these algorithmic business models goes much deeper than employment. It actively alters human neurobiology.
The University of Beirut recently analyzed 42 studies involving nearly 30,000 participants to understand the human toll of short-form video platforms like TikTok.
The mechanics of these platforms are not comparable to watching traditional television. The algorithms continuously run thousands of tiny real-time experiments on users, exploiting the unpredictability of the infinite scroll to map and manipulate psychological vulnerabilities.
The biological mechanics of this algorithmic exploitation are just startling. Overstimulating the brain's reward system with the unnatural, rapid-fire triggers of short-form video causes an absolute flood of dopamine.
And to protect itself from this toxic hyperstimulation, the human brain actually downregulates. It physically decreases the number of active dopamine receptors, essentially boarding up its own windows to survive the storm.
The public consequence of that is severe reward desensitization. Users require increasingly extreme, shocking, or polarized content just to feel a baseline level of normalcy.
They systematically lose the ability to find joy, or even basic engagement, in modest, everyday human interactions.
This biological downregulation is the ultimate hidden cost of the attention economy. It is not merely passive screen time. It is the systematic engineering of behavioral addiction required to generate the engagement metrics that justify these massive trillion-dollar tech valuations.
When you combine the reverse centaur workplace, where humans are reduced to checking the outputs of AI with algorithmic platforms that literally downregulate our dopamine receptors, you are looking at an economic model that actively degrades human agency, creativity, and psychological well-being simply to sustain its own growth.
And while technology executives look to the cold vacuum of space to cool their massive data centers, the physical reality on Earth is becoming dangerously hot.
As of June 22, 2026, Germany is gripped by a severe heat wave, with temperatures hitting 40 degrees Celsius or 104 degrees Fahrenheit. This extreme weather carries immediate life-or-death public consequences.
Sudden, violent storms triggered by the heat in Saxony-Anhalt caused a fatal highway accident over the weekend.
In the city of Halle, the management of a popular lakeside beach with water depths up to 13 meters had to implement a strict German language requirement for visitors. This is not a cultural statement. It's a desperate safety measure, so lifeguards could effectively communicate complex health rules to prevent mass drownings in the overcrowded water.
The 40-degree heat wave makes the abstraction of climate change violently physical and immediate. It strips away the geopolitical theory and leaves citizens dealing with fatal storms and overwhelmed civic infrastructure.
Yet, despite the undeniable reality of these temperatures, Germany is currently embroiled in an intense, highly polarized political debate over the Kohleausstieg, which is the legally binding national commitment to phase out coal-fired power generation.
Because of spiking natural gas prices directly caused by the ongoing conflict involving the U.S., Israel, and Iran, German politicians are heavily considering delaying the planned 2030 phase-out of lignite.
Lignite is domestically abundant and cheap, but it is also the lowest quality, most heavily polluting soft coal available. How does a society morally and practically navigate the immediate civic need for affordable, reliable energy when the environmental consequences are literally burning them outside their front doors?
You have just defined the ultimate governance trap of our era. The German coalition government is caught between the immediate geopolitical necessity of keeping the industrial economy functioning and the long-term imperative of climate survival.
When global supply chains are disrupted by asymmetric warfare and regional instability, the default political reaction is to fall back on the cheapest, most secure domestic energy source available, entirely regardless of the carbon output.
Short-term economic and political survival actively undermines long-term human survival. The vast infrastructure required to transition away from fossil fuels demands the very economic stability and capital that is currently being eroded by global conflict and extreme weather events.
We are witnessing unprecedented concentrations of capital and algorithmic control on one side of the ledger. You have $1.75 trillion space valuations, artificial intelligence systems rewriting the fundamental rules of the labor market, and short-form video platforms actively engineering human neurobiology.
Yet, none of these digital advancements offer an escape from the physical deterioration of the planet. Pushing back against that concentrated digital and financial power is the unyielding heavyweight of physical reality.
We are seeing the physical exhaustion from 40-degree heat waves, the brutal 100-meter-a-day territorial warfare in the Donbass, and the civic decay evident in mass protests over protected lands and independent media.
The friction between the frictionless, infinite ambitions of technology and the heavy, fragile realities of human survival is defining every level of global governance and daily life. You cannot upload a burning forest, and you cannot algorithmically optimize a city running out of fuel.
Consider the reverse centaur concept in your own daily routines. Are the digital platforms, algorithms, and tools you interact with every day actually granting you more civic agency and expanding your human capabilities? Or are they quietly training you to adapt your behavior, your attention span, and your expectations to fit their business models? For more daily briefings, brain candy explainers, and classic audiobooks, visit clarineratio.com.